I'm going to invite Mr. Nick Wittenhall to join me up here. Nick, would you be willing to do that? You suppose? You sound really energetic. And
I'm so energetic. Yeah, I need more coffee.
Okay. Well, I can get you some. I'm doing nothing right now. I don't know how to sit through a sermon.
But I don't know if I can drink coffee that's full of grounds, Kevin.
You You just don't, just my poor beaten little heart.
I'm sorry.
You're probably not, actually. And I just learned, just sift the grounds through your teeth and then give you something to chew on afterwards. It's a really good...
Extra added caffeine.
Yes, exactly. Coffee with grounds, the meal that keeps on going. So this is Nick. Nick, about 5 years ago. You have one fan.
I know, I have one fan.
Nick, about 5 years ago, planted Ignite Church in Oakdale. Mm-hmm. And Nick did and led that church with tenacity and enthusiasm for 5 years. How much of the story are you going to explain to us? Or?
I'll explain some of it.
Okay, so anyway, as you might have known, Ignite Church chose about a little month ago to cease to do formal ministry together.
Correct.
And Nick has been processing what that means for him. And so he is courageous enough, as Nick is often courageous, right? To jump in headfirst in this topic and talk about failure and what failure means. And I think this is super important. I'll just say from my perspective, I think so much of American Christianity has been built upon look successful. And if you look successful, God must be with you. And I don't think that's at all in Scripture. And sometimes God leads us to places that get real difficult, and Nick has the chance to talk to us about that this morning. Is that good?
That's awesome.
Good. Okay. Great to have you here, my friend.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. This is kind of fun. First of all joking aside, you guys are so lucky to have Kevin as your pastor. I have been blessed to know him, I would say, for 6, close to 7 years. Just getting to know him, he's kind of almost been like that father figure where when I'm stuck, I'm like, Kevin, I need your help. And he was always there. He's the most gracious, most loving, most kind man that I have met. So you guys are so lucky and blessed to have Kevin as your leader and as your pastor. And don't ever take that for granted. But I also feel kind of like, well, you know, the topic I'm talking on is failure. I kind of feel like Maverick and Top Gun at this moment. One of my favorite movies, Top Gun, where if you remember the movie, Maverick is flying his jet with Goose as his buddy behind him, and they go into that flat spin, they eject, and what happens to Goose? He dies. And Maverick is struggling with getting back into the cockpit of that plane because he fears that happening again, and he's struggling with the failure of his leadership as a pilot, and then he's got the leader of his Top Gun unit or the leader of his area saying, you got to get him back in the cockpit to fly again. And I feel like Kevin is that guy for me today, saying you need to get back up in the pulpit and preach, because it is difficult struggling with the idea of coming and talking to you about this. Mainly for one of the reasons is because it was about 6 years ago, I stood right here asking you guys to come join me on this venture. Because you guys were one of our parent churches as well as Renovation Church out in Blaine with the amazing leadership of David Sorn. And so I kind of feel awkward where come join me, and now I'm like, oh, don't join me anymore, kind of a thing. It's kind of just awkward, it's weird. But today I'm sharing with you about how that church I have, quote unquote, failed. And I want to share with you my personal struggle and my personal feelings of failure and how I'm dealing with it in hopes that it might help some of you who might feel like you're in that area of life where you feel like you have failed, whether it's in your marriage, in your career, in your walk with Jesus, in whatever it is, or maybe in parenting, you feel like you are failing as a parent, that I might be able to come and just say, hey, it doesn't end there. It continues going on no matter where you're at, because the truth is life doesn't often turn out the way we plan or expect. It never comes out according to plan. I believe that Christians really struggle with this concept the most. Because think about it, as Christians, We feel like if God is on our side, you know the Bible verse, who if God is for you, who can be against us? We think that if I'm a Christian and I got Jesus behind me, if I have the God of the universe behind me, I cannot fail. It's never end. Like I will always succeed because after all, God, why would God want to hurt me? His precious child. And I thought about that when I went in to go start our church. I'm like, dude, I am going to start a church. Ain't no way God gonna let that struggle or fail. No way. I mean, God called me to do this. There's no way it is ever going to end. And I went into this thinking that there's no way anything bad could happen. Starting a church, leading people, pointing people to the Messiah, to the Savior of the universe. Well, on October 7th of 2012, we launched our service with 250 people in attendance. I was like, I left that day, drugs couldn't get me that high. Okay? I left, I'm like, see? Look at this. 250 people in attendance with sounds like, it's okay, but we had 33 people launching this church with me. So to go from 33 people to 250, my mind was blown. I was like, man, God's gonna do something great. We ended up settling down to around 80 to 90 people in regular attendance on a Sunday morning, and we went on for a few years reaching people turning their lives to Christ for the first time. I mean, doing incredible things. We were reaching people. We still had our struggles as a young church, financial struggles and things, but it was like no big deal. That's what happens in church life until you become established. Our first year, we baptized well over 10 people out in Lake Elmo. We had a family in our church who lived on Lake Elmo. It was so awesome. They opened up their house and their beach to us to go baptize people. And we had 100 people in attendance to watch this. So we made a big deal of it. We had it catered by my favorite restaurant, Brasa. If you want a good restaurant after church today, go to Grand Avenue in St. Paul and go to Brasa. The best food you'll ever eat. Guarantee it. And then since it's National Ice Cream Day today, go get yourself some ice cream across the street at Grand Old Creamery. Can't go wrong. Now all you're thinking about is ice cream because it's National Ice Cream Day. I know I am now. Can we just call it a Sunday now? No, never mind. So we baptized people. We baptized over 10 people on that service. We had 100 people in attendance. And then 2 years go by where we're doing some incredible ministry stuff, and that's when all the struggle started to happen. That's when the downhill decline in our church happened. For whatever reason, our attendance started to drop down lower and lower and lower and lower and lower until we just simply weren't sustainable anymore. We didn't have the manpower to continue going on. We weren't able to hold what I would say an excellent service on a Sunday morning. And it was at that point where I had to make that difficult decision. Do we try to push on and do mediocre, less than par work and burn out the rest of the people in our church? Or do we just end it here? And that was one of the hardest decisions I ever had to make in my life. And any businessman who looks at what we did or what I did, and he would look at me and say, you failed. Your business failed. But I want to challenge your thinking this morning on what it means to fail. Because I think we have the wrong idea of failure based on what our culture and our society describes failure as. Because I think the greatest fear from keeping people from being successful is the fear of failing. So we fear taking those risks. John Maxwell, author, an expert in leadership, he's also a pastor, says this. He says, the difference between average people and achieving people is their perception and response to failure. The difference between average people and achieving people is their response and their perception of failure. Leadership magazine also tells us that failure is far more common than success. Those people who are successful, they have a lot more failures behind them than they do successful moments. And so the question that we want to look at is not if you will fail, but the question that we need to answer is, what are you going to do and how are you going to respond to those moments when you do fail? Because you aren't going to succeed at everything. I mean, I look at the problem we have in our society today, and I think it's mostly with parents. If you're a parent, I don't mean to give you a hard time. I'm a parent. I have 2 young boys, 9 and 11. I love them to death. I haven't seen them in 4 weeks, by the way. They've been traveling back and forth between grandma's house all summer. They don't want to come home. I don't know what it is. But the worst thing that we can teach our children is that they cannot fail. I mean, look in sports, in little kid sports. There is no first place, second place, third place awards. It's everybody gets a participation award. Oh, you did good. Good job. Here's an award. People who work their butts off to do well are rewarded the same way as those who are lazy and don't care and don't give a rip about anything. They're rewarded equally. It's teaching our kids that, hey, guess what? You don't have to work to get an award. You can sit on the bench, you can pick dandelions in right field and do whatever you want, and you're going to get the same recognition as the people who practiced every week and was hardworking. You're going to get rewarded the exact same way. And it's caused a problem in our society. Look at the up-and-coming generation coming in where they feel they deserve everything right away. They graduate college, and right away they demand a six-digit figure salary. All the vacation time they want. They want to be able to come and go as they please because guess what? They feel they can just walk in and I deserve it because I've been given participation awards every year just for showing up. I don't have to work hard. I don't have to do good work. I just have to show up and I should get the reward that everybody else is teaching them. And they do that because they've never experienced failure. And this implies something to the culture. It implies that failure is horrible. That failure is so bad, it's like saying the name Voldemort. He who shall not be named. I'm glad you laughed. I was a little nervous about the Harry Potter joke in a church. But here's the thing. I want you to understand this, and I think if you're going to get anything this morning, this might be a little nugget for you to take away is what we need to do is we need a new definition of failure. We need to create a new definition of failure. And I'll be honest with you, I don't have a concrete definition of failure, of what I think it should be. But I know it's not what we look at it in our society and our culture. I know that's not what it is because I look at verses like Proverbs chapter 16, verse 9. It says, we can make our plans, but the Lord determines our steps. Right? How life never seems to go according to your plan. But it's always going according to God's plan. And what's unfortunate about life and what I don't understand is our plans and God's plans oftentimes aren't the same. Was my plan to have start a church, put everything, blood, sweat, tears, lives on the line? To just say, I'm going to give it a go and just see what happens. If it's done in 5 years, no big deal. No, I put everything into it, and my plan was that it was going to, like any church planter, and I'm sure because Kevin and David Sorn, they have a passion for starting churches. You're going to see church planters coming up here who are getting ready to start their church, and they think in their mind that they are going to be the next mega church leader. I mean, because we're egotistical enough, we're big-headed enough to think, that's going to be me. I'm going to start a church, and from day one, I'm going to have 1,000 people in attendance. And then in a year, I'm going to have 5,000 people. We're big-headed, and we think that's going to happen. But our plans aren't always the same as God's plans. Because I think sometimes God leads us down the path toward and through failure and struggles for a purpose and for a reason. Therefore, if we struggle, if we go through failure, is that really what it is? If that's a part of God's plan, is it really failure? No, it's called learning. It's called learning. Because for whatever reason, God takes us sometimes through those difficult paths to teach us to put our trust in Jesus through every season, every situation, everything that comes our way. It's teaching us. He's teaching us in those times to put our faith and trust in Jesus to walk through with us in those things. Because so often when we fail at something, whether it's our marriage, our parenting, our jobs, or a sport, we see that failure as an isolated moment. One moment in time, and with that one moment in time, we create this definition for our entire life, that I'm a failure. Because one thing in my life did not go well, I am therefore a failure, and we begin to believe that as truth because we repeat it over and over and over in our life, and that instance replays in our mind over and over and over. Whether it's your marriage, whether it's your parenting, whether it's your career, whatever it is, we play it over and over, and we begin to believe and define ourselves as a failure, when in reality, we can't determine if we are a failure until the end of our life. And by then, you're dead, so who cares? Right? We can't take a one moment in our lifetime and determine that as the one moment that caused us to be an entire failure. What we need to do is learn to see the big picture. Step back and look at the whole picture. And this is probably the most difficult thing to do as Christians, or as any human being, to step back and look at life in the big picture. Because we are so focused on the here and now. We have our blinders on. All we see is the specific moment in our life. And what we need to do is we need to stand back, look at the whole picture. When I look at the 5 years, or if I were to be technical, it would be, I believe it was 4 years and 8 months we were open as Ignite Church. I can look back and say, yeah, we failed. We failed miserably. We weren't able to do what I thought was the work of a church. I can look back and say, yeah, we failed. I failed. I am a failure. But if I do that, what ends up happening mentally? If you've ever experienced failure in any time in your life, you look back and you just get depressed. And I'll be honest with you, I struggle with depression because of this. It's like, God, seriously, you did this to me. Somebody who was willing to sacrifice everything that I had, the relationships that I had built, all the finances that I have, my family. Like, seriously. And I can easily go down this path of depression, and I can get discouraged. And if I continue down that path, what ends up happening to my faith in Jesus? Out the window. It's gone. And what kind of a life is that if I sit and I focus on one instance of my life where I had quote unquote failed? Nothing good comes from it. Instead, I have to look at it with a different definition. And what that is, I'm still processing that. I'm still working through that and what that is and what that looks like. But I know it's not what our society shows as failure. Because I ask myself these questions. Did we lead people to Jesus? Oh my gosh, yes. We led close to over 30 people to Jesus within our first 2 years. I mean, a lot of established churches don't see that in a 10-year frame. And we did that in just a couple of years. Did we restore people's faith in Jesus? People who had walked away and come back? Yes, we did. Did we restore people's faith in the church? Yes, we did. I could tell you stories up here for the next 2, 3, 4 hours of people that I have encountered and met with that came to our church, hated church because of some past experiences, and came to be some of the most faithful people to the local church, to the ministry of Ignite Church. And it wasn't just me, it was a great big team of people, but we didn't fail because it didn't go according to my plan. We succeeded because it went to go according to God's plan. It's all in how you look at it. I think of it kind of like this. This is a very personal story. When we first opened up, we had a young couple come to our church. And they weren't married, they were engaged. And so the young woman came and wanted to get baptized at her baptism service. And I baptized her. It was phenomenal. She was the daughter of the woman whose house we were using for this baptism service. It was awesome. It was cool to be a part of her life at that point. And then about a year later, I was able to do their wedding at this beautiful farm. I mean, it was just gorgeous. It was beautiful. It was a hot day in a suit. I just remember that. That was brutal. But it was awesome to watch this young woman. I baptized her. I saw her make this public confession of faith to over 100 people in attendance, people she didn't know and people she did know. And then I was there to perform her wedding and to be part of that in her life. And then a couple years later, she got pregnant. It was incredible. It was her first child. And it was going to be a girl. And they were so excited about this girl, this daughter that they were about ready to have, and she's born. And to see this precious little baby. Their life was changed. I mean, their life was going so well. Incredible things were happening in their life. They're brand new parents. And about 4 weeks later, For some reason, God did something that I will never understand of why he does things like this. And it was something that I hope I never experience this again as a man, as a human, and especially as a pastor, but that she was about 4 weeks old, she died of SIDS. It was the most heartbreaking thing as I'm sitting in the hospital room with them, just crying. There's no words you can say to a family like that. But let me ask you a question. That little child that died, she's about 4 weeks old, did she fail at life? No. She didn't fail at life. For whatever reason, God said, I only want you to be on that planet for about 4 weeks. Sure, it didn't go according to plan. No parent puts that into their plan. Yeah, I'm only going to have a child that lives a few weeks. But that was God's plan to just be there. And I bet you that little child impacted more people in those short weeks of being alive than she would have impacted in a normal lifespan. You can even ask this question, did those parents fail at parenting? No. It was completely out of their control. None of these, the little girl and these parents, they didn't fail. That was God's design, God's plan. For whatever reason, God allowed those things to happen. And I put those two things side by side. This little child that didn't live very long, and our church that didn't live very long. Again, things don't always go according to our plan, but they always go according to God's plan. And we can't look at failure moments and take the blame on ourselves because sometimes they are out of our control. So we can't blame ourselves when those moments in our life happen that we cannot control. I also look at the life of Job. If you ever get an opportunity to read the book of Job in the Bible, it's a fantastic story. I mean, this was a man who you could say failed at life because he lost everything. A very rich, very wealthy man, had everything. And Satan saw this man and goes to God and says, hey, God, see Joseph? I bet you I can make him turn against you. God's like, psh, no way, bro. We tight. And so God says, go for it. You can do anything you want him. He's not going to turn and reject me. He will stay faithful to me. Do whatever you want. You can't take his life, though. And that's exactly what he does. Satan goes and takes away all of his money, takes away his children. And for some reason, I think Satan's got a twisted mind. He let his wife live. Right? And not only that, but then he's covered in sores all over his body. He's in utter pain. He's lost everything. Everybody, his wife and his friends are saying, dude, reject God and get over with this. Because God can't be behind this. You've got to reject him. And Job was like, no. I'm going to continue being faithful to my God. And through his faithfulness, God ended up restoring everything back. It was out of his control, and sometimes failure is our fault. Sometimes we make stupid decisions in our life, and it causes failure in our life to happen. Look at the story of David. You all know if you grew up in the church, you know the story, and unfortunately this story is not a flannel graph story, which I wish it would have been. It would have been awesome. But the story of David, when all the men are out to war, and David's like, no, I'm staying home. And he's up, drinking some iced tea on the roof of his castle or whatever. He's up there just sipping away, maybe reading some novel, just chilling, working on his tan. He looks across to another rooftop or into another house, looks in the window, and sees a naked woman. And of course, what does he do? Bring her over. So he has, her name is Bathsheba, brings her over to his house. He puts on some Barry White. Next thing you know, he's a daddy. He failed because she was married to another man, and as a result, he goes on and tries to cover it up. Puts Bathsheba's husband on the front lines, knowing that in the front lines, every man dies on the front lines. Puts him on there, he dies. Again, trying to cover up everything. See, David, we look at David as this awesome man to look at in the Bible because he wrote the Psalms. He's passionate. He loved God. But you also have to look at this moment. He also failed miserably. But we hold him at such high esteem. Because he goes and he covers it up, tries to sweep it under the rug to make sure nobody ever knows about it. He refused to take blame. He refused to accept responsibility, which is what most people do when we're caught in a situation where it's brought upon failure in our life. Let's make excuses. It wasn't my fault. Somebody else did this and caused it to happen to me. This was forced upon me. I couldn't help myself. It was either this or this, and I had to choose this. It was the lesser of the two evils. We begin to blame and make excuses. And what ends up happening in David's situation? He's confronted by somebody who knows the truth. And finally, when David is confronted, he's forced to face up to his failure. He repents and he moves on. He owned it. You want to set a good example in moments where you have struggled or you have failed? Here's what you can do. Own it. Own it. I messed up. But that doesn't mean God's finished with me yet. Because that's the example we need to set to people is we get it. We might fail. We might struggle at something. We're not supposed to fear it. We should embrace it, pick ourselves up, dust ourselves off, and continue moving on. That is what we need to do because there is a necessity of failure. We need to experience these times of failure, these times of struggle, because it brings us to the point of realization that really we can't do things on our own. We cannot do things on our own in life. I look at Proverbs chapter 3 in verse 5. It says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. Seek his will in all you do, and he will show you which path to take." In the moments of failing this church, of seeing this church go down, and I'm wrestling with these thoughts and feelings of failure, this is what I have to cling to. I can't lean on my own understanding because I don't understand why. I've talked to people who were in the close-knit of leadership in our church. I said, what's going on? Why is this not working? And all of us are dumbfounded. I don't know. I have no idea. We provide a good quote-unquote product. I mean, we did excellent church. Yes, I might be a little biased, but I even talked to other people. We provided excellent church services, excellent ministries in our church. And I don't get it. I don't understand. So I have to rely on God, not on my own understanding, because I don't get it at all. I don't understand. Because one of the things I've learned is that God never promised a life without failure or struggle. Never once in the Bible does he ever say, you follow me, you're never going to go through that stuff again. The life's going to be peachy. I mean, look at all the Bible grace that we have to look up to. Abraham lied about his wife twice, and they took his wife and used her, put it bluntly. David, after he repented from his sin, we just talked about his story, he wrote about it throughout the Psalms. Now we get to look at it and learn from his mistakes so that we don't make the same thing. Moses murdered somebody. And yet God still continued to use him to lead the Israelites out of slavery. And why are they the greats? They've all experienced failure. And we look at them as the greats. Do you see the necessity of failure? Because through our failures, they learn the most powerful tool there is, and that is courage. Because you can't learn courage without the risk of failure. If you want to become a courageous individual, you have to be willing to risk yourself into failure. One of the things that I do to kind of get rid of my stress and pent up energy is I go and I work out at my local CrossFit gym. I love that place. And it's a way for me just to throw heavy weight around to get rid of pent-up energy. And when I was angry with God, when I was angry with life because of what was going on, man, I was throwing lots of weight around. I was in that gym almost 6 days a week, throwing things around. And as I was talking to there was one individual who came up to me, and I knew he was a Christian. He was an older man. He asked me about how our church was going. And it was the first time I verbally said this out loud to somebody that wasn't in our church, that we were closing. It was the hardest thing for me to verbally say out loud to somebody who wasn't a part of my church. I almost was embarrassed to say it. And he looked at me and he said, "I'm sorry to hear that." And this man is a very wealthy man. He started multiple businesses in the Twin Cities, and he told me a little story. He says, when I got out of college and I was getting ready to become an entrepreneur and start these businesses, I wanted to know what I was getting into. And I went around and I interviewed businessmen, successful businessmen in the area. And they were all older businessmen who were pretty much retired or about to retire. And he asked them multiple questions. One of the questions he asked them was, do you have any regrets in your business adventures? And almost all of them said the same thing. I wish I would have taken more risks. I wish I would have taken more risks. And he looked at me and he says, you're one of the very few men who is willing to risk it all. Imagine what that's going to do for you in the future. What you're learning through that. And that spoke to me from somebody I didn't even really expect to hear from. Just brightened my day in that moment. See, we can't truly feel or experience or even enjoy success without failure. Thomas Edison, he was told by his teacher that he was too stupid to learn anything. And eventually he came to invent the light bulb, but he failed at that 10,000 times. And you know what he said about it? He said this, he said, I didn't fail. I just found 10,000 ways that didn't work. Or look at Vincent van Gogh. In his lifetime, it's been said that he only sold one painting in his lifetime. And now his paintings are worth over $66 million. Whew. I'll take a donation to that. Or look at Walt Disney. Walt Disney was fired from his newspaper job. And his boss fired him because he, quote unquote, lacked imagination and had no good ideas. That was a mistake. Or look at Michael Jordan. Oh, I love this man. I grew up in the Chicago area during the Bulls year. Oh, it was so fun to watch this man step foot on the court. Even when he was sick, he did record-breaking things out on that court. But the interesting thing about Michael Jordan, while he will be forever rated, as at least in my eyes and most sports fans' eyes, as one of the greatest basketball players to ever play, he was cut from his high school team. I mean, imagine if he stopped there. Well, I'm a failure. We would have missed out on a lot of great basketball. Or I look at Peyton Manning, quarterback. Was a quarterback of the Denver Broncos. His rookie year, he went 3-13. Most quarterbacks probably would quit then. Well, I suck at this game. I'm done. They're not going to hire me back. But he continued on, and look at the stuff that he accomplished and the things that he was able to do. The Chicago Cubs. They failed for 103 years. Think of how much that World Series victory tasted. It could not have tasted so good if they hadn't had failed for 103 years. You got like the Yankees who win it like every year. It's like, oh, let me have another bag out of that gummy worm shut bag. Yeah, not a problem. I don't care. They don't care if they win it anymore because they've won it so many times. Chicago lost their minds when they won. See, there is a necessity to failure because if we don't ever fail, we never get to taste success. See, there's a necessity in that. So if you've been defining yourself as a failure or you're struggling with the idea of failure, I want to close with 3 quick thoughts as I finish up here, real quick. Use those experiences as a teacher. Learn from them. I'm still learning. It's only been about 4 or 5 weeks since it's been gone. It's still painful. My wife and I'm going to be completely honest with you, we'll go visit other churches and we still weep in the back. But I'm learning. And who knows what this kind of message is going to turn into in 5 more weeks as I continue to learn what God is doing and using this as an experience of what it looks like to quote unquote fail according to our world. Secondly, force yourself to rely on God. You have to force yourself. It's not a natural instinct for us to rely on God at all. My natural instinct, and I'm going to be completely honest with you, that last Sunday when I said amen and we cleared up and we loaded up the trailer and that was the last time we were ever going to set up church, can I be honest with you? I wanted to go to a bar and get smashed. Because I'm like, I'm done with this. I'm sick of this. Why did this have to happen to me? And then I was like, no. God would be so disappointed in you if you did that. Just like my parents would be disappointed in me if I went and did that. My church would be disappointed in me if I went and did that. No, I'm going to rely on God as hard as it is, as difficult as it is. I'm going to just plant my feet on the ground, and I'm going to rely on God to do what he needs to do in my life. And then thirdly, go through the new open doors. When I finally closed the doors, a lot of people said, oh, Nick, man, there's going to be so many cool new open doors open for you. I'm like, shut up. I don't want to hear that. This hurts. And then after about 3 weeks of people saying that at least once a day to me, I just began to tune it out, and then it dawned on me. That is so true. As much as I didn't want to hear it, I needed to hear it that many times. And as a result, doors are starting to open up for me to do things that I love, like come and preach for you guys. Go to do things that I have just personal enjoyment in, and do things and using those moments to go out there and be an example of Jesus to people. To go and show them that with a failure doesn't mean you're done. Because guess what? He's not finished with you. He's not finished with me, and he's not finished with you, because you and I, we still have breath in our lungs. And since we still have breath in our lungs, we have a purpose. We have a meaning. There is a plan for us, that God has a specific design for you and I, because I believe this with all my heart. If we still have breath in our lungs, the best is yet to come. Let's pray. God, this morning, thank you for your son, Jesus. Thank you for your willingness to stick with us through the difficult times, even through the great successful moments in our life. But thank you so much, God, that through my experience, you're there even at the lowest. So this morning, God, I pray for those here this morning who are wrestling with those thoughts, who think of themselves as a failure. God, I pray that you would move into their heart, move into their mind, and teach them new truths, that they are not a failure, that they are learning. God, and I pray that they will take what you are teaching them and apply it. Whatever that looks like, God, I pray that you would speak mightily into their life this morning. God, thanks so much for what you do. Even if it hurts, thank you. It's in Jesus' name, amen.